I spent 4 years being loyal to a woman who ran hot and cold like a faucet, and the night she broke down crying at a wedding in front of everyone was the night I finally understood what I had been doing to myself. Walking away from her was the best thing I ever did, and what came after proved it. I almost didn't go to that wedding. I had RSVP'd yes back when Soren and I were still together, and by the time the day came around, we had been broken up for almost 2 months. The couple getting married were mutual friends I had originally brought into our social circle, so I figured I had more right to be there than she did. But I almost didn't go because I knew there was a chance she'd show up, and I wasn't sure I was ready to be in a room with her in front of people who had watched us fall apart. I went anyway. That decision changed things. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Her name was Soren. That's what everyone called her. Her actual first name was something more traditional, but she had gone by Soren since college and she wore it like a statement. She was the kind of person who collected things that set her apart. Unusual name, unusual opinions, unusual taste in everything. When I met her, I found all of it magnetic. I was 28. She was 27. We met at a gallery opening that a mutual friend dragged me to, the kind of thing I would normally have left after 30 minutes, but I stayed because I got into a conversation with her that I didn't want to end. She was interesting in a specific way that I hadn't encountered much before. She didn't ask the standard getting-to-know-you questions. She had opinions, and she shared them without looking for validation, and she pushed back on what I said in a way that was challenging rather than combative. By the end of the night, I had her number, and I was already thinking about when to use it. We were together for a little over 4 years. I want to be careful about how I describe that period because it was not 4 years of misery, it was 4 years that had genuinely good stretches and a genuine connection and real moments of happiness. I don't want to rewrite history and make it sound like I was obviously being tortured the whole time. It wasn't like that. But there was always a pattern underneath the good parts. A temperature in the relationship that I couldn't control or predict. Weeks where she was warm and present and we were truly good together, and then something would shift, a coldness would come in, a withdrawal, a sharpness in the way she spoke to me, and I would spend days trying to figure out what I had done and what I needed to fix. I understand now that the cycle was the point. Not consciously, maybe. I don't think she sat down and planned it. But the pattern of hot and cold kept me in a constant low-level state of anxiety about the relationship, always trying to earn back the warmth, never quite sure what the rules were. Looking back, I should have named that pattern in year 1 instead of year 4. The first sign that I remember clearly was about 6 months in. We had made plans for a Saturday, and she canceled the morning of with a text that said she needed space. No explanation. When I asked what was going on, she told me I was smothering her, and that she needed her independence respected. I had no idea what I had done to warrant that. I spent the rest of the weekend in a kind of low-grade distress, replaying the week looking for my mistake. She came back around 3 days later, warmer than she had been in weeks, and the subject of the canceled plans never came up again. I kept making excuses for her. Creative personality. High emotional intelligence that came with high emotional volatility. She had told me about a difficult relationship before me, and I filed a lot of her behavior under the category of residual damage from that. The problem with that framework is that it put all of the responsibility for her behavior on her past, and none of it on her choices. About a year and a half in, I started noticing a man named Callum in her stories and conversations. Not conspicuously, just repeatedly. A person who kept appearing. She mentioned him as a friend from a creative community she was part of, a photographer, someone who had interesting ideas. I asked about him once, casually. She said he was just someone she knew through work-adjacent stuff. She seemed slightly annoyed that I'd asked. I didn't push. I didn't want to be the insecure boyfriend. The thing about not pushing is that the thing you're not pushing about doesn't go away. It just moves out of sight. By about the 2-year mark, I think I knew something was off in a way I was refusing to fully articulate to myself. The coldness cycles had gotten longer. She was on her phone more, less present when we were together, quick to find reasons that evenings needed to end early. I asked her twice if everything was okay with us, and both times she said yes, and then turned something back on me, asking if I was feeling insecure, suggesting I might want to look at why I was seeking so much reassurance. I told myself she was probably right, that I had attachment issues, that the relationship was fine and I was manufacturing problems. I was emotionally starved, and I had gotten so used to it that I thought the hunger was my fault. Then came the night I caught her with the phone. We were at her place. She had been quiet most of the evening in the particular way that made me feel like I was doing something wrong just by existing in the room. I had gone to the kitchen to get water, and when I came back, I glanced at her screen, not snooping. She was holding it at an angle where I could see it, and I saw a message thread open. The name at the top was Callum. I didn't read the content. I just saw her laughing at something on that screen in a way she hadn't laughed at anything I'd said in weeks. I sat down. I said, "You're texting Callum." She locked the phone. "I talk to a lot of people." "You've been talking to him a lot. Are you monitoring my conversations?" "I just saw the name on your screen." She put the phone face down and looked at me with the expression she wore when she was deciding how to manage a situation. Then she said, "I think we need to have a bigger conversation." I knew, sitting there, that the bigger conversation was not going to be what I needed it to be. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking, that she had been reading about relationship structures and had come to understand that monogamy wasn't the right fit for her, that she felt constrained in our relationship, and that she thought if we opened things up it would actually make what we had stronger, because she would be able to be fully honest rather than feeling guilty about connections that developed naturally. I remember the word naturally. She said it like it was a force of weather, something that had happened to her without participation. I said, "When you say connections that developed naturally, are you talking about Callum?" She said, "I'm talking about a broader principle." "Soren, are you sleeping with him?" She held my gaze for a moment, then she said, "I've been spending time with him. I care about him. I didn't mean for it to happen the way it did." "So yes." I was trying to find the right way to tell you. "How long?" She said it had been a few months. She said she had been planning to have this conversation. She said she hadn't wanted to hurt me. And then she said, and this is the part I still think about, that she felt like in a lot of ways this was actually a healthier expression of who she was than pretending she was someone who could be fully satisfied in a conventional relationship. She said the cheating was a healthier expression of who she was. I want to make sure that sentence lands. She cheated on me for months, and her explanation was that it was more authentic than fidelity. I didn't yell. I was surprised by my own calm. I asked her one more question, which was whether she had ever intended to be monogamous with me or whether she had simply been waiting for an opportunity to reframe what she wanted. She said that wasn't a fair characterization. I said, "I think it's the most accurate one available." I left her apartment. I drove home. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time before I could make myself go upstairs. What followed the next few weeks was its own specific kind of pain. Not the dramatic, explosive kind, more like the slow ache of realizing that the thing you thought you had been building had different blueprints than you knew. She texted me asking if I wanted to talk about what opening the relationship could look like. She sent me articles. She said she understood this was a lot to process, and she wanted to give me space, but she also wanted me to know that she was still committed to us, that Callum and I could coexist in her life if I was willing to be open-minded. I read one of the articles, then I put my phone down. I want to be honest, I thought about it. Not because I wanted it, but because I was 4 years in and she was someone I had genuinely loved, and the idea of blowing up the relationship entirely was its own kind of terrifying. I spent maybe a week in a fog of genuine indecision, missing her, wondering if the problem was my own rigidity. Then a friend of mine said something that cut through all of it. Her name was Petra. I had known her since before I met Soren. She was someone I had stayed friends with across a lot of life changes, the kind of person who was honest with you in a way that wasn't harsh, but didn't soften things to make you feel better either. I told her the situation, the full version. Petra listened, and she didn't interrupt, which was how I knew she was taking it seriously. When I was done, she said, "She's asking you to renegotiate the terms of the relationship after breaking them, and she's framing the break as evidence that the original terms were wrong." I said something like, "Yeah, that's basically it." Petra said, "That's not a conversation about what you both want. That's a rewrite of history that protects her from accountability. I said I knew that. She said, but knowing it and feeling it are different things, and you're still in the feeling part. She was right, I was. Petra didn't tell me what to do, she never did. She just helped me see things clearly enough to make my own call. I called Soren a few days later and told her I wasn't interested in an open relationship and that I needed her to understand this was final. She said she respected that. She said she was sorry I wasn't willing to explore this with her. She said she hoped I would eventually understand that this was about her being honest with herself and that it wasn't about me. I said goodbye and I hung up. That was about 2 months before the wedding. In those 2 months, I did what you do. I went to work. I saw friends. I tried to eat enough and sleep enough and not spend every evening doing a forensic analysis of the last 4 years. I was not great at all of those things, but I was trying. I started running into Petra more. It started as coincidence. We had some overlap in our friend groups and were going to the same things with more frequency than usual. Then it became intentional. We'd grab coffee after the thing or before it. We'd text when something funny happened or when something was hard. I want to be clear about the timeline because I know how it sounds and I want to be accurate. I was not falling for Petra while I was still with Soren. That's not what happened. Petra was my friend and had been my friend for years, and I had not thought about her in any other way during the relationship. What happened was that after the breakup, with the space and clarity that came from no longer being in a constant state of low-level anxiety, I started noticing things about my friendship with Petra that I might have noticed earlier if I hadn't been so consumed by managing Soren's moods. I noticed that talking to Petra was easy in a way that conversation with Soren had stopped being. I noticed that she asked how I was doing and actually waited for the answer. I noticed that she disagreed with me sometimes, and it didn't feel like an attack. I noticed that a couple of hours with her left me feeling like myself rather than like I had been subtly interrogated about my adequacy. I noticed all of this slowly, over weeks, and I didn't do anything about it because I was 2 months out of a 4-year relationship and I was being cautious. And then the wedding happened. The venue was a converted farm property about 40 minutes outside of the city. The ceremony was outdoors, late afternoon, late summer light, the whole thing beautiful in the way outdoor weddings can be when everything cooperates. I arrived early, found my seat, and spent the 20 minutes before the ceremony starting with the particular alertness of someone who is waiting to see if an ex walks through a door. She walked through the door about 5 minutes before the ceremony started. Soren looked good. She always looked good at things she considered social performances. She was with a friend, scanned the seating, found a spot several rows behind and to the right of me. Our eyes met for a second and then we both looked away. Completely normal, completely manageable. The ceremony was lovely. I focused on it. I like weddings, genuinely. There is something about watching two people make a public decision to choose each other that I find moving, and I let myself be moved by it instead of spending the hour analyzing Soren's proximity. The reception was where things unraveled. It started well. I was seated with friends I hadn't seen in a while, people I was genuinely happy to catch up with. I had a drink, ate the food, danced a little, felt as normal as I had felt in 2 months. Petra was there too. She knew the couple from a different angle, and we had texted about both being there. And somewhere around the middle of the reception, we ended up at the same corner of the room and stayed there, talking for a long stretch in the way you do when the conversation is good enough that you stop monitoring whether you should be doing something else. I don't remember exactly what we talked about. Parts of it I remember clearly. She made me laugh about something. We argued mildly about a movie. She said something that was true and unexpected about loss. I remember the feeling of the conversation more than the specifics. It felt like breathing out after holding your breath. I didn't register Soren watching us until one of my other friends caught my eye from across the room and gave me a look that meant pay attention to what's happening. I looked over and saw Soren at the bar. She was not being subtle. She was watching Petra and me with an expression I recognized. It was the expression she wore when something had not gone according to her internal script, and she was deciding what to do about it. I looked back at Petra. I said quietly, "Soren is watching us." Petra said, "I know, she has been for a while." "You didn't say anything." I was waiting to see if she'd do something. That was Petra in one sentence, actually. She noticed things and she waited to see how they developed before she acted on them. It was the opposite of how Soren operated, which was to act first and explain later if at all. About 20 minutes after I'd noticed Soren at the bar, she came over. She touched my arm, which I hadn't expected. She said she had been wanting to check in and see how I was doing. I said I was good. I introduced her to Petra, which she clearly didn't need. Soren knew who Petra was. Soren smiled at Petra in a way that wasn't a smile, not really. Then she said to me, "Can we talk for a minute?" I said, "I think we said what we needed to say. I just want to talk, 5 minutes." Petra excused herself to find a drink, and I gave her a look that I hoped communicated I'd be fine. I let Soren lead me to a quieter area near the edge of the reception. She was doing the thing she did when she wanted to access the version of me that would hear her out, softer voice, less armor, physical proximity. She was tactically vulnerable. She said she had been thinking about things and she realized she had handled everything badly. She said she knew the way she had framed it, the language she had used, was hurtful and she was sorry. She said she had been scared of being honest and the dishonesty had gotten away from her. I said, "Soren, I appreciate you saying that. I really do." "But," she said, "but I'm not interested in relitigating this." She said, "Are you seeing her? Is that what this is? This conversation is not about Petra. You looked happy when you were talking to her." I said, "I am happy. That's not about Petra either." She went very still. The softness she had been performing receded, and something rawer came through, something I recognized as the emotion she couldn't manage the way she managed everything else. She said, "I didn't think you would actually move on." I heard that sentence and I understood what it contained. She hadn't thought I would actually move on. Meaning, she had expected that leaving on her terms, redefining what we were on her terms, keeping Callum while retaining some ambient claim on me, that was the arrangement she had envisioned. I was supposed to remain available in some form. I said, "I have to be honest with you. That's not fair to either of us." She said something I didn't hear clearly because her voice broke in the middle of it. I want to describe what happened next carefully because it's the part I've thought about most. She didn't argue. She didn't attack. She started crying, which I had seen before, but this time it felt different from the tactical crying I had sometimes seen from her in arguments. This was something more uncontrolled, something she wasn't performing. She turned away from me and pressed her hand to her mouth and her shoulders shook. I stood there and I felt something that surprised me. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just sadness, clean and simple, for a version of us that had never quite been what I had wanted it to be. I said, "I'm sorry you're hurting." She said, through the crying, "You don't have to say that." I said, "I mean it." Some of the people nearby had noticed. Not everyone, but some. There was the particular stillness that moves through a room when something real is happening in the middle of something that is supposed to be a celebration. One of the bride's aunts quietly guided Soren toward a side exit, not unkindly. I stood there for a moment, and then I went back to find Petra. I don't know what Soren did for the rest of that evening. I know she didn't come back inside. I heard later from a mutual friend that she had sat outside for a while and then left, and that she had been upset. I felt genuinely sorry about that. Not guilty, I hadn't done anything wrong that night. But sorry, in the straightforward way you feel sorry when someone is in pain. Petra found me before I found her. She came up beside me and said simply, "You okay?" I said, "Yeah, I actually am." She looked at me like she was checking whether that was true or performative. I said, "I mean it." She said, "Okay," and we went back to the reception and that was that. We left together at the end of the night. Not dramatically, we walked to the parking area, talking, and when we got to where my car was, I didn't want the conversation to end, and I said as much. She said she didn't either. We sat on the hood of my car for another hour and talked about nothing particularly important and everything that mattered. I drove home that night and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like the future was just the future. Not a thing to be anxious about or managed. Just what came next. Petra and I started officially dating about 6 weeks after that wedding. Neither of us rushed it. We had known each other for years, and there wasn't the electricity of two strangers discovering each other. It was quieter and more solid than that. We knew each other's real personalities. We had seen each other in good times and bad. There was nothing to perform. The difference between that relationship and what I had with Soren was not dramatic in the way of movies. It was quiet in the way of something that is simply right. She told me the truth. When something bothered her, she said so, and then we dealt with it and moved on rather than storing it and deploying it later. When I asked how she was doing, she told me how she was actually doing. When she was happy with me, she showed it without making me guess. And when she was frustrated, she showed that too without making it a weapon. I know how that sounds. Too easy, too simple. But that's genuinely what a relationship without manipulation feels like, and I had forgotten. Or maybe I had never fully known. I ran into Soren once, about 4 months after the wedding. A coffee shop. She was alone. We made eye contact, and there was a moment where either of us could have nodded and looked away, the way you do with exes you have quietly resolved never to speak to again. She came over. She asked if she could sit for a second, and I said yes. She looked different. Not bad different. Just less armored than I was used to seeing her. She said she had been in therapy for a few months, that she had been trying to understand some of her patterns, that she had realized she had used the framing of self-empowerment and liberation to avoid accountability for things she had done that were just, plainly, wrong. I said I was glad she was doing that work. She asked how I was, I said good. She asked if I was seeing someone, I said yes. She nodded slowly. She said, "Is it Petra?" I said yes. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I figured." She said it without bitterness, which surprised me. She was always solid. I could see why you'd be good together. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said thank you. She stood up and she said, "I'm sorry for what I did and how I explained it. You deserved better than both of those things." It was the clearest apology she had ever given me. No frameworks, no reframing, no story about her own growth. Just "I'm sorry, you deserved better." I said, "I appreciate that." She left. I sat there for a while with my coffee getting cold, and I thought about 4 years and what they add up to and what they don't. What they don't add up to is who you become after them. That part comes from different material. I want to say something about the cycle she ran on me, because I've talked to other people who recognized it, and I think it's worth naming clearly. The alternating between cruelty and warmth, the long cold periods followed by sudden affection, it's not a personality quirk, and it's not a sign that the person is complicated and interesting. It's a mechanism that keeps you focused on earning approval instead of evaluating whether the relationship is actually good for you. Every time she came back warm after a cold spell, the relief I felt was so strong that it reset my tolerance for the cold spell I had just been through. I would think, this is the real her. The warmth is real. The coldness is a phase I can get through. And by the time the next cold spell came, I was back to wondering what I had done wrong. It took me a long time to understand that both the warmth and the coldness were real, and that neither one was an accident. The cycle was how she kept me. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it because I think recognizing the mechanism is what lets you leave it. Petra and I have been together for just over a year now. We moved in together 2 months ago, which was a decision I went into without a single gram of dread, which was new for me. Our apartment is small and occasionally chaotic and exactly right. She will probably read this at some point, since I told her I was writing it. I hope she knows that whatever clarity I'm trying to pass on to whoever needs it, I would not have been able to see it from inside the other thing. You helped me see what things were supposed to feel like. I don't know how to quantify that, but it's not nothing. If I had to summarize 4 years and what they cost me, I would say this. I gave consistent loyalty to someone who treated loyalty as a trap she kept trying to escape. I interpreted her emotional unavailability as depth. I interpreted her cruelty as complexity. I interpreted her refusal to be what she had agreed to be as evidence that I needed to try harder. All of those were wrong. She was not complicated. She was someone who wanted the benefits of commitment without its obligations, and when that became untenable, she called it growth. I don't think she was evil. I don't think she woke up every morning planning to wear me down. But her patterns were what they were, and they cost me years of emotional energy that I am not going to pretend was free. The wedding is what I keep coming back to. Not because of the drama of her crying in front of people, though I understand that's what makes it a story. I keep coming back to the moment just before she came over to talk to me, when I was standing with Petra, and I was just present, just there, not scanning for what I'd done wrong or monitoring the temperature of the room to figure out if I was approved of. I had forgotten what that felt like. The moment I remembered was the moment I knew for certain it was over. Not over in the sense of done, I already knew it was done. Over in the sense of finished. Gone from the place in my chest where it had been living as unresolved weight. That was worth 4 years to figure out. I wish it had cost less. But here's what I know. The version of me who sat in that parking garage after leaving Soren's apartment was not the version of me writing this now. That guy was confused and exhausted and couldn't see 2 weeks in front of him. The guy writing this knows what he wants and what he won't accept and what it feels like to be genuinely and quietly happy. The difference is not subtle, it's enormous. If you are in a relationship where you are constantly trying to earn warmth that should just be there, where your limits get reframed as failures, where someone's choices become your responsibility to absorb and adjust to, please listen to the part of you that already knows. That part has been right all along. You've just been too busy managing the temperature to hear it.